CommaRules rule. Yes, there are rules for using commas. A lot of students say to me, I think I underuse commas, or I think I overuse commas. Well, there are a set of rules for using commas, and you don't have to guess, and you don't have to, or get to, make it up. Now, just as an aside, grammar rules differ by country. In America, the Modern Language Association decides for us. There are also some different style manuals for publishing companies and for documentation styles. However, the comma rules are basically the rules that we use in America. In England, they vary a little. In Australia, they vary a little. So, just so that you know. But the good news is that there are only basically 7 comma rules in the English language in American English. And that's very exciting because there's not very many of them, and you all already know 4 of them. Most people use those correctly just fine. It's the first 3 that students are not sure about. So that all should be good news. Now, the first rule is separate main clauses linked by coordinating conjunctions. In other words, use in a compound sentence before the fanboys. Easy peasy. So simple. Number 2, set off introductory elements. That means if there is an introductory clause in a complex sentence, or something like an adjective clause or phrase, or an adverb phrase, or simply a word, a transitional word like and or however. And the third rule is set off non-essential elements, and that's really the most difficult one. I'll get back to that. Separate items in a series, you all know that. Set off coordinating adjectives. Now, I need to explain that a little bit. So, he was a big, tall man. So, this could be he was a big man or he was a tall man. These adjectives can work separately. That means they're coordinate or equal in meaning. However, if you have a compound adjective or 2 words that work together as one adjective, you need to hyphenate them together. So, an example is, he lived in a military style tent. So he didn't live in a style tent. He could have lived in a military tent, but he didn't live in a style tent. That can't act alone as itself. An interesting thing about compound adjectives is they're very old in the English language. Go back to almost the very beginning of the English language, which is around the 2nd or 3rd century. And English is a hodgepodge of Greek, Latin, French, some Spanish, and so all of those began to form together until the language we have today, which has been around for about the last 500 or 600 years, pretty much set ever since Shakespeare's day. Believe it or not, that is modern English. What Shakespeare used was modern English. Vocabulary does change over time, however, obviously. At any rate, a compound adjective is called a kenning in Old English poetry, and that is a combination of 2 words being used together. For example, a whale road was used to describe the sea, but it looked like this. A whale road. Oops. Hyphenated together. Moving on, separate parts of dates, addresses, place names, and long numbers. Well, you know how to do dates, you know how to do addresses, you know how to do long numbers. Place names, though, is often misused. So, he lived in Irvine, California, and he worked there too. Place names means if you insert a state and sometimes a country, you have to have a comma on this side and this side of it as well. We could take that out altogether, so it's kind of a non-essential element. A lot of times you will see this, and I've seen it even sometimes in the media, but it's incorrect. Plus we need a comma before the and in a coordinating conjunction in a compound sentence anyway. 7 is to separate signal phrases and quotations. You can look up, and I'll provide it for you in the language spotlights in a separate document, but there are separate signal phrases and quotations rules. So the most common one in academic writing is incorporating a quote. So a signal phrase is something like he said, go eat dinner. He said is a signal phrase. It's signaling that there's going to be a direct quote. However, we don't use that very much in academic writing. In academic writing, you might write a prominent scientist, Benner, wrote something interesting about a subject, and then we would probably put a page number following it. So that's what this means by separating signal phrases and quotations. So let's look at some more examples. In this case, we need to know where to put the comma in. Elizabeth Blackwell, who attended medical school in the 1840s, was the first American woman to earn a degree. This is an example of a non-essential element. In many cases, it's in a positive or an element that renames the subject. This is non-essential to the sentence. If we took that out, Elizabeth Blackwell was the first American woman to earn a medical degree, then we have a simple sentence with this is the subject, this is the verb, and this is the subject complement, this is an infinitive, which is to plus a verb, and a direct object here. But it's just one clause. If we put in this extra non-essential information, then we set it off with commas because, again, it's non-essential. Some textbooks describe this as restrictive and non-restrictive information. So again, this needs to be like this. Here's another example. Italians insist that Marco Polo, the 13th century explorer, did not import pasta from China. This is a non-essential element. It's in a positive phrase describing Marco Polo. It could be taken out, just like here, and the sentence would still be intact. It doesn't change the meaning in any way. A lot of times students will put in this one, but not that one. In the non-essential element rule, you have to treat these like little handles. You could take this in, and out. The next example is the same thing, also Rule 3. Pasta, which consists of flour and water and often egg, existed in Italy long before Marco Polo left for his travels. So again, this could be taken out. Doesn't change the essential meaning of the main clause. In this case, however, a historian who studied pasta says that it originated in the Middle East in the 5th century does not need commas because this is essential information describing this particular specific historian because the name isn't included. It's necessary for the meaning of the sentence, so no commas. In this one here, an important source of water is underground aquifers. There's no comma needed, none of the rules apply. In fact, the sentence would be better if it were edited into the active voice. Underground aquifers are an important source of water. We'll get back to that in a different lessons between active and passive voice. In this case, we have two commas working. one of the largest aquifers in North America. This is an introductory element. It's describing the Ogallala Aquifer, which is the subject of the main clause here. This is just extra information. If it were in the middle, it might qualify for Rule 3, non-essential. In this case, we have a non-essential element, which is a subordinate clause at the end. It's not necessary for the meaning of the sentence. It just adds extra information. In number 6, we have 2 rules going. In this case, it's a non-essential element, this list of things here. When you use such as, it's almost always a comma setting off the such as phrase, and it's non-essential to the meaning of the main clause, which is here. And then we have just an item in a series. And yes, formally, according to MLA rules, you put the comma, sometimes called an Oxford comma, before the and in your list. In this case, we have scientists estimate that the rate the Ogallala will be depleted in 40 years, but at the present consumption, this was the original exercise. Scientists estimate that at the present consumption rate, the Ogallala will be depleted in 40 years. This is non-essential information that's interrupting the main clause there. We could take it out. We could also put it at the beginning, and then it would be using Rule 2, an introductory element. And finally, we have some areas are experiencing water shortages already, and the pumping continues. Rule 1 is just a compound sentence. Put a comma before the coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys, in a compound sentence, which was explained in the sentence lecture. Yay for commas! Commas are your friends, and they rule. And this was Comma Day, your lucky day. From now on out, you will use the comma rules correctly. Good for you!